Welcome, everyone. Tom Dixon here, your host of the Financial Experts Network. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy Tuesday. Delighted to have back once again, probably, I know at least our third time, maybe fourth time, Professor James or Jim DeLilio. He's at Pepperdine University, beautiful area close to LA if you've never been. I've never been on campus. I've driven by the front gates, but certainly a beautiful setting. Jim has done a lot of great work in the area of Roth conversions and kind of tax-related issues, and he can touch on some of the papers that he's done in the past, some of which have been award-winning, if not all of which have been award-winning. But today he's coming back to really share some interesting insights on considering or valuing a Roth conversion under uncertain tax and return times. I'm modifying the description there, but there are a few big variables, as we all know. And guess what? Jim, being a mathematics genius, puts some math to it, right? And it really has some fascinating work in this area. So anyway, delighted to have Jim back. And as always, by the way, it's a reminder that if you're not checking out past webinars on the Financial Experts site, I really encourage you to go on the site. Financial Advisors has a drop-down menu. If you click on past webinars, you can find the sessions that Jim has done previously. Again, he's done some great sessions. So today's going to be a combination of some slides that Jim has prepared, and he has this really fascinating calculator tool that he's going to use to walk you through several different Roth conversion scenarios. So, Jim, great to have you. I'm going to go off screen. I'll come back for the polling questions, Jim. And again, thanks for joining today.
Great. Well, thank you. I think somehow I had my in slideshow view. Let's see if I can get that going again. Let's see here. Looks like we can get the slideshow working again. Tom, is it showing? Are you still able to see my screen?
We can see your screen, but it's more the thumbnail view. If you go to slideshow maybe one more time.
Yeah, I'm in the slideshow button, and it says resume slideshow.
You want to maybe
Let me
go
try
to
closing it in. Yeah, right up here maybe. No. So let me just close it and reopen it. Maybe it's having some issues there. All right. Does that look better, Tom?
Perfect, Jim.
Okay, great. Well, Tom, thank you for that introduction, and I want to thank all of you for coming today to hear about some of my research in this area. As you heard mentioned already, the title is Valuing a Roth Conversion Under Tax and Return Uncertainty. My name is Jim DeLilio. A little bit about me. So as of this coming August, I actually just got a promotion to what's called Full Professor of Decision Sciences at the Graduate Business School at Pepperdine University. And as Tom mentioned, we are headquartered out of the Malibu area, so I am here in Southern California. I have my PhD from Northwestern University, and my current research interest and focus is on tax-efficient algorithms and retirement income and ETFs. I also founded ETF Math Guy as a subscription education service for tax-efficient retirement income and investing with exchange-traded funds. So I'm certainly taking a view of this problem from an academic perspective, but really started the website because I was getting a lot of questions coming from individuals in financial planning practice about, hey, how can some of your research actually be used in practice? How can it be distilled in a way that we can better understand it? And so that's what prompted me to create this site. And also, lastly, I do want to emphasize that as an academic, of course, the views I'm presenting here are solely mine. They're not representing those of the university. This is really my academic research. So as a summary, this webinar is going to present some of my latest academic research into Roth conversions. In fact, it was actually about a year ago where I was presenting to to the Financial Experts Network. And during that, I actually ran a poll, and I said, hey, what of these categories of areas are you of most interest in? Roth conversion bubbled right to the top. So that was wonderful direction for me in my research. It helped me understand where a lot of you in practice have interest. So I've spent a good portion of the year working on that, and today you'll be hearing many of my findings. I do want to acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Philip Goldfeder, who's at Northwestern University, as well as Dr. Ed McQuarrie at Santa Clara University. We have all been involved in this research up to this point. And I will say this work is at an early to mid stage, and I expect the manuscript will be submitted for an upcoming academic and professional meeting in the fall. And as academics know, publishing does take a while. I wouldn't expect any of this work to be published until as early as 2024, or maybe even a little bit later, depending upon how the peer review process works itself out. So learning objectives, I do have 5. The first is to review the difference between traditional and Roth IRAs. I realize for many of you, you probably already know the differences, but I just want to highlight the ones that I think most salient and relevant for my conversation today. The second is to discuss funding options to pay for the tax liability from the conversion. The third is to identify uncertain future conditions that leads to the optimal decision to convert. I'm using language there actually from an area called decision analysis, which actually has its roots in financial options. So we're talking about optimal decision making here. We want to quantify the break-even point for a conversion funded by a taxable investment when there are significant unrealized capital gains. Many of you are probably quite familiar with this idea that, hey, why not use your cash in order to fund the tax liability from a conversion? However, if that cash has to be raised by selling off investments, there is going to be a break-even, and I'll be able to show you what that is here today. Then lastly, demonstrate an online calculator. Everything I'm going to be showing you is really fundamental, some of the fundamental math and uncertainty associated with the Roth conversion problem, but I've already embedded that into an online calculator because I realize many of you don't want to run your own analysis. You want to have software that's ready to go that can go ahead and integrate this into other aspects of planning, and so I will show you a demonstration of that as well. All right, I have my first polling question. Tom, did you want to go ahead and do this one, or should I go ahead and read through it?
Nope, no, I'd be happy to. And folks, if you want to use the question box to participate, I could not, I don't think I could fit this one in. Let me see here. Let me double check. Yeah, I don't have that automatically. So again, if you want to use the question box, that's great. Again, just as a reminder, so you can just put in A, B, C, or D. I'll give an anecdotal summary of that, Jim, in a moment. And then, folks, just as a reminder, I responded to, I think it was Gary's question, one of the first questions, and gave a link to the survey that Jim referenced. And if you haven't already, your participation would be great. So let's give you 3 more seconds. 2, 1, I would say, Jim, 98% were answered B. So I think that's a correct answer. Yes?
That is the correct answer. Just discuss funding options to pay for the tax liability from the conversion. That is one of our objectives. Excellent. I'll go ahead and continue on. So just a high-level summary of the difference between tax-deferred and tax-exempt accounts. Right, tax-deferred accounts usually take on pre-tax contributions. They usually will reduce taxable income. They usually have income tax due on withdrawals. They're subject to required minimum distributions, and they include things like the traditional IRAs, rollover IRAs with pre-tax contributions, 401ks, 403bs, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the tax-deferred. The tax-exempt are typically after-tax contributions, no income tax due on distributions, no required minimum distributions. It includes the Roth IRA, the Roth 401k, and Roth 403b accounts. Really, this area of research really got going in about 2010 when the income limit on conversions was removed. So that's sort of a key milestone in terms of the research that academics have done in this area. So that's the difference. Here's some of the funding options. You can either use your converted assets. That means you'll reduce the amount that is in the Roth IRA, but it is then subject to a penalty if the conversion is done before age 59 and a half, because that means you'd actually be doing an early withdrawal. You could also have, and you have a positive payoff, and this is key, it entirely depends on the lower rate at conversion than at the point in the future. So if tax rates are lower today, it's worthwhile making the conversion, otherwise it's not. There are no other variables, and I show that actually in my work mathematically. You can see that pretty clearly. Alternatively, you can use taxable account assets. Those would typically include or often include highly liquid assets like cash, stock, or ETFs. But that liquidity may trigger short or long-term capital gains taxes. And the liquidation to pay the tax liability increases the amount in the tax-exempt account and avoids the tax drag of the taxable account assets. So that's why it's often preferred to use taxable account assets. You already have some tax drag depending upon what it's invested in. And you can avoid that tax drag by using it to pay off a tax liability that then maximizes the Roth IRA amount. So the use of a taxable account assets to fund Roth conversion is generally preferred to maximize the after-tax wealth. But the key being, and I haven't been able to find much literature on this, is that, well, what if you're triggering some kind of capital gains in order to raise the cash in order to pay for that? Okay, here's polling question number 2. Which of the following statements is false about using converted assets to pay the tax liability from a Roth conversion? A, this approach will, well, I won't read through them. I'll let you read through them. And Tom, I'll hand it back to you for a moment.
Yep, and let me do this. Let me launch the window. Please use the window to participate. So for this one and the next polling question, I was able to fit them in go to webinar with some slight modifications. There are field limits there, but again, please use the pop-up window. As always, we welcome your participation. Let me just address the question, a couple questions as well. By the way, if the screen appears small to you, we all have the ability to enlarge the window that you're seeing Jim and his slides. You can, there's either a menu bar at the top that you can use and just change it on a percentage basis, or you can just simply grab the edges of your, click on the edges of your window and just expand the window. So if you do that with your cursor, you can always expand the window with that. And then let me just also address, we had a few people ask about CE. So Mark and Carol, as I mentioned in the beginning, I do on every session, today's session is worth a CE credit, provided you're either a subscriber or the guest of a subscriber. Just to make that very, very clear. I hope that's super clear. As always, I say, you don't want to sign up just to punch the CE ticket. You can get CE a lot of places. We're all about the quality of the education. So love to have you, but with that proviso. Jim, let me share that 51% said this approach will increase an individual's long-term capital gains tax.
That's correct. Yeah. So this approach will increase an individual's long-term capital gain tax. That is in fact false. Great. For whatever reason, Tom, are you still able to see my screen? I keep jumping me out of slideshow view.
We do. Again, it took you back to the slide sorter, if you will.
Yeah, so
if you go back up to the top, I think if you went to the top option on PowerPoint, Jim, in the middle of the menu and hit slideshow, that works usually. But yep, to the left there, your view, and then you go to the left of where you're in the middle. No, you got home, insert design.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, very good.
Okay. Let's get down. So we did the second polling question. So I do have a little bit of math in this presentation, just so you can see some of the evidence of where this comes from. This is to identify the uncertain future conditions that lead to optimal decision to convert. If you're using the converted assets to fund the tax liability, I actually show mathematically that after N years, this is what the payoff looks like, where V sub N is the value of the account that's been compounded over N periods. And what you can end up seeing is that this If you do a little bit of algebra, this is only positive when the tax rate today, tau naught, is less than the future tax rate, or the current tax rate is less than the future tax rate. And why that's important is that positive payoff is independent of the future uncertain pre-tax account value, which means it's independent about what these rates of return were. You're independent now of the market. It's also independent of the amount converted, and I'll say with the caveat that, right, as you convert more and more, it might push you into multiple tax brackets. I'm assuming you're within a single tax bracket. So within that bracket, it doesn't matter how much you convert. So it's independent of market returns as well as the amount converted. This is what it looks like graphically. In fact, I always like to represent this in terms of a tax alpha. That's something I did in my last paper that seemed to come over really well, because it does really quantify for many in practice, what it is that they're trying to bring to their clients. So you can actually show that the value, this alpha of tax, or the additional return that you're generating by doing this conversion, looks like this. And so I show 3 cases here. If we have our tax rate today of 25%, and I assume it's 50% higher in the future, that means within the first 5 years, your tax alpha is almost as high as 4%. But what happens is over time, that benefit tends to decrease. And so even after, say, 40 years, you're still at about 50 basis points of benefit from that conversion that was made today. That was the additional alpha that you're getting from it. So the idea is that you get a benefit, but it shrinks over time. But of course, if you make the wrong decision, if I made the decision today and 5 years later, in fact, the tax rate, say, got cut in half. The tax rate today was 25%, and then the tax rate later was, say, 12.5%. Your tax alpha is actually a negative 3%. So this is one of the challenges and the dangers of using Roth conversions. What if you make the wrong decision? On the upside, as you can see, over time, it will level itself off. And so it will never be a large positive or negative, but it will reduce the amount of penalty over time if that wrong decision was made. I will say that is one of the challenging things about Roth conversions. No one knows what the tax rates will be. It really does come down to what our Congress decides they're going to be in the future. So here I have the last polling question. Which of the following statements is false about using converted assets to pay the tax liability from a Roth conversion? Tom, I'll hand it back to you.
Yep. Again, let's use the pop-up window. Folks, as always, if you don't see the pop-up window, you may need to minimize the window or screen where you see Jim and or the presentation slides. Usually that's not the case, but if you are having that issue, that's what you need to do. You then can see the pop-up poll, and many are seeing it. So I'm confident that things are working as they should. So again, please use the pop-up window, not the question box, to participate. And yeah, again, Gary and others, if you're having problems, the only advice I can give you. I'm sorry you're having trouble. And again, Dan, if you're not seeing the window, you want to take the cursor, your cursor on the outside of the window and try to enlarge it, the viewer, or again, look for a menu bar at the top right above Jim as he appears, and you should have some options you can click on to expand. So, okay, we're going to bring it to a close. These are good questions. I know it's making people think, take a little more time here. So let me close that up. Jim, the most popular was 44%. Positive payoff can become negative if markets perform poorly.
That's exactly right. And the reason being is that, in fact, it's independent of the markets. It doesn't have any effect. The markets have no effect on the payoff. So again, I'm running into this issue when the polling starts. My PowerPoint can't go into slideshow mode, but that's easily fixed now. Okay, great. So that was polling question number 3. Okay, so the next part of what I wanted to talk about was, okay, so we've had a good discussion about if you use funds from the conversion, what does that look like? And actually a fairly simple problem. All you really care about is tax rates. So that's great. That really does simplify the decision. But what about if you're going to use a taxable investment with unrealized capital gains to fund the conversion, to fund that tax liability? So using taxable investments does provide greater tax efficiency to meet the tax liability from the Roth conversion. Actually, I believe it's Alan Roth. I don't think any relation to the Roth that's associated with Roth accounts. Wrote a really nice article in Advisor Perspective that actually highlighted the case where you can actually quantify those numbers. So I actually used that as my base case. I thought it was so well written. Why not use it? He very nicely articulates in this article that, in fact, the reason you'd want to do this is because alternatively, if you don't use your taxable investment, it's just got this tax drag that occurs every year and is not going to be as tax efficient as if you use it to pay the tax liability and then maximize the amount in your Roth account. So I took this work and we took it and we extended it under two conditions. In fact, one of them, Roth actually highlighted as this would be an area for future work. So very nicely set up for us to be able to do that. The first is that some capital gains taxes occur when liquidating the taxable investments. So you might have something with some kind of cost basis that when you sell it off, you have some type of tax bill. We also consider the fact that in some cases, a taxable account may never be liquidated, which means it goes to an heir and it receives a step up in basis, which is actually a fairly tax efficient approach already. So we wanted to consider that as an alternative. And so we looked at current and future tax rates assumed to be equal so that we could really isolate the effect of the taxable account. We already saw in our previous analysis what happens with current and future tax rates. We already know you want your current tax rates to be lower than your future tax rates. So we said, let's just keep them equal here and see what kind of benefit we're getting or what kind of effect we're getting by using this taxable account. Okay, so now market returns really matter. And so this is kind of a good news story because we know over time, the markets tend to do well. And so this is actually a distribution of rolling 10, 20, 30, and 40-year returns of the S&P 500 going all the way back to 1871 from data used from the Irrational Exuberance from Princeton University Press. I really want to acknowledge my co-author, Ed McQuarrie. He's quite the aficionado when it comes to understanding how these work, getting the data, and I was able to pull this together. And what this shows you is that, yeah, it's possible that at 5 years, you had a gain as high as 20%, or you had actually a loss, and your average is going to be right around, it looks like around 7%, right? So that's what this whisker chart represents for the 10-year returns. And what happens is over 20, 30, and 40 years, as you have those longer and longer returns, your annualized return is going to stay pretty steady, right around that 7% or so. But the dispersion, the worst case, like the worst 40 years, is around 2 to 3%. The best 40 years is just barely over 10%. So that's really helpful because this is going to actually fold into our analysis when it comes to using the taxable account. Okay, so what we did was we looked at different periods of time. So this is looking at 5 years. So what happens if you use your taxable account today to liquidate it to help fund it? And the way you can read these charts is the horizontal axis here is the fraction of the cost basis. So if you were to sell your taxable investment and there were no realized capital gains, you would be at a value here of 1. As you would incur capital gains, so for example, let's just suppose you needed to sell an investment that's currently valued at 10,000, but you bought it for 5,000 years ago, its fraction of a cost basis would be 50%. And so what this shows is that, yeah, if it's just cash available, that in some cases, like in the 5th percentile, you actually, this ends up being better off not using the money to convert. You would have been better off not doing that, versus if markets do really well, then yes, you should have converted. So that's what that's showing there. The expected value here, it's around 20 to 30 basis points, not very exciting. Now, if you bequeath the account to an heir, so if that taxable account goes to an heir, the calculus changes significantly. The calculus now says that, you know what, you pretty much don't want to use any assets below about almost like 90-something%. of cost percentage of your cost basis. And that the market returns don't play a big role. So this is kind of saying, you know what, if these funds are just going to go to your heir, unless it's already in cash, leave the money invested, don't use those funds. Whereas over here, we're saying, you know, on an expected value case, probably about 0.7, that's probably about where you'd say, let's not sell these taxable assets, let's keep them because they will be of greater value later. Okay, so that's the 5 years. Then I look a little bit farther out at 20 years. Now you can see almost always you're getting to a point of break even, regardless of the fraction of the cost basis. Kind of the same thing here when it comes to the when you bequeath the accounts to an heir. Here you can see there's less sensitivity to the market because there's less distribution in the market returns. So break even almost always occurs with significant variability from these market returns. So if you had a market that did really well over the 20 years, you would have had a pretty high value of an expected annualized tax alpha, versus if markets don't do so well, your tax alpha is going to be noticeably lower. And then of course that gets pulled down because you're paying some of those unrealized capital gains. You're realizing some of those capital gains in order to pay for that tax liability. So interesting different stories between the two, whether it goes to get the step up in basis to your heirs or it's actually used by you after the 20 years. And then lastly, the furthest we went out was the 40 years. Here's we're saying that we always get break even. It's always worthwhile after 40 years, regardless of how the markets did. It's going to be worthwhile, and regardless of the cost basis. But you know, this is where, as you can see, you're not talking about a lot of additional tax alpha, anywhere between about 10 and 20%. Now, bear in mind that may not seem like a lot, 10 or 20%, or 0.1 or 0.2%. But remember, that's compounded over 40 years, so it's certainly not. It won't be a negligible amount, especially for accounts of a significantly large size. And then something similar here, even less sensitivity to market. Here you get a break even of around 3/10. So that means if you had to liquidate an account that had the value of 10,000, if you had invested 3,000 to get there, you're paying the capital gains on that 7,000. That's when the break even occurs. You wouldn't want to sell off one that had larger unrealized capital gains. Okay, so some conclusions from this. There are two elements of tax alpha that exist in Roth conversions. The first is the immediate, then diminishing effect of current versus future tax rates. Again, we have no control over what those tax rates are. It's largely a hunch of, hey, do we think we'll be in a lower tax rate in the future or not? Some of it is controllable. You can take larger distributions from your 401k or your IRA. That would obviously trigger higher taxes. In the demonstration I'm going to show you here with my software, I actually take that into account already, which is already keeping your income very, very smooth, so it doesn't trigger any larger effects. So you can already cover that in some respects by just more careful planning. So that's the first element of tax alpha. The second element is the using of a taxable account to fund the tax liability, provided it doesn't trigger significant capital gains. And this is where, you know, the devil's in the details. As we saw, tax alpha can be highly sensitive to short or medium-term market conditions if assets are used later for retirement income. So that also depends upon, you know, where these assets are eventually going to go. If they're in a very tax-efficient investment, it doesn't have a lot of tax drag, and there is going to be a step up in basis, it's a less compelling issue to be liquidating that versus just eventually leaving that to your heir. And then last but not least, tax alpha is most reliable when assets are passed to heirs whose marginal tax rate is higher than the retiree. So we can't provide absolutes, but this does provide us some certainty that you want. If you're thinking about these assets going to an heir and you're currently at, say, the 25% tax rate or the 20% tax rate, and you know your heir is going to be at, say, the 30 or 35% tax rate, well then that's going to be a good opportunity to take advantage of this tax alpha and gain some of that tax efficiency. Okay, so actually at this stage, what I wanted to show you was how these concepts of Roth conversions would integrate into an online calculator. So I have an online calculator. It's been up and running for a while now. It's actually based on some research I've been doing over the last many years. And what I'd like to be able to show you is that there's really three categories of retirees out there that my software analyzes. The first is the retiree that has insufficient funds to satisfy their retirement income needs. So on these two scales, that's someone that has a requirement income need that's fairly large and or a retirement horizon that's fairly long. So you may say, gosh, I want a high level of retirement income and I want it for the next 50 years. Okay. Versus then this category, this top left section is then, well, what if their net worth and their annuities just can't get them there? They literally will run out. They have insufficient funds. So that's the first category. The second category is they have sufficient funds, but not excessive funds. So they have enough funds to fund their retirement income, but not so much that RMDs become an issue, not so much that just the interest income from their taxable account is more income than they need. They're kind of in this sweet spot. And then the last is what happens if they have an excess amount of retirement income. So this is an individual who has issues with RMDs. They're being triggered when they don't need the income. They have interest income that they don't need or goes above and beyond what they need. So what I will be able to show you is that the middle and upper left regions already exhaust tax-deferred accounts using a tax-efficient algorithm. And because of that, they don't benefit from Roth conversions. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in just a moment. Conversely, this lower right section, I guess this is the section if you're the retiree is sort of the best place to be. You have far more assets than you will ever need to support your retirement income needs. This is really the best candidate for Roth conversions, with significant assets being passed to an heir. So what I have here is, let me go over to my calculator and let me see if I can bring it up here. So the calculator is available. If you go to the main site, you can actually click on retirement income calculator. When you click on that, it brings up the calculator. I'm actually not going to run it. It does take between 30 and 60 seconds to run. And I will warn you, if all 100 or so of you get on the calculator right now, my server probably can't handle it because this is a lot of computations going on. But what I did do is I ran several cases. And so I wanted to step through those cases so you can see what those results look like. The first case is the case where the individual runs out of money. And I'm just going to highlight some of the inputs that go into this. Things like, well, you need to know what is your age when you start retirement. How much after-tax retirement income do you need? And then what is your retirement horizon? At each step of the way here in the software, you can always just take your mouse and put it over the little question mark, and that'll give you a hint. It says here, enter your age. By the way, you might notice you can't go less than 60 years old. That's the lowest it goes. That is intentional. If you decide, oh gosh, I really want to run a case where I'm less than 60, that's actually a separate model I've created. It's actually called the pre-retirement savings forecast. It's one that would not only allow you to see how much savings you'd have in retirement, but would allow you to potentially draw down your taxable account, which of course then would be without any kind of penalty since you're not officially in retirement per the government's definition of age 59 and a half. So that's actually another calculator. This one is entirely free. It actually runs Monte Carlo simulation and basically tells you how much you'll have accumulated once you go off and prepare for retirement, which I'm assuming at the earliest is age 60. So you have an age, you have a after-tax retirement income. Again, you can just go ahead and hover it over. My colleague actually, who's in the thought leadership area at T. Rowe Price, actually suggests a 75% number. Obviously, this is a big question. What is your after-tax retirement income going to look like? That's a personal choice. This is a reference. I typically get individuals who use this that say, well, I don't even know what number to put in here. This could give you some guidance. Then lastly, your retirement horizon. How long, basically, how long do you think you're going to live for? Here I provide another really nice resource from Professor Dean Foster at the University of Pennsylvania. It actually does a longevity calculation. You provided some information about your health, your lifestyle, your background, and it will indicate, hey, this is a reasonable amount of time that you might be able to live for. And so then you can use that to enter that piece of information. You do the same thing for your spouse or domestic partner. And then you have to provide information about your retirement savings account. In fact, I mentioned here, if you're not yet retired, go ahead and you go to this other calculator, which I had just shown you. And you provide the information about tax-deferred accounts, tax-exempt accounts, which is your Roth type accounts, your taxable accounts, your cost basis. Again, if you're not sure what these things mean, you just can go ahead and hover your mouse right over the question mark. And then you can have information about your spouse's accounts. I ask information about Social Security. This has actually come up before. I've had individuals ask me and financial planners ask me, well, hang on, how much and when should I take Social Security? There is a free open source Social Security strategy calculator out there. I don't claim to try to make it any better. So I recommend, quite frankly, if you're not sure, go ahead and use that. Go ahead and open this calculator. Go ahead and enter the values you think you'd want to use. It's, like I said, it's open source and completely free. Highly recommend it. You take that information, you enter that in for your Social Security, as well as if you have any pension. You do the same thing for your spouse. You need some information about your heir's tax rate, and this is critical because remember, when we talk about taxes, we care about not only what your tax rate are, but what the tax rate of your heir is going to be. I have the ability, if you want to model an increase in taxes in the future, otherwise I assume that they just grow at the rate of inflation. And if you would wish, you can actually choose the year at which the Tax Cut and Job Act expires. Last but not least, some information about rates of return, inflation rates, dividend and coupon rates. And in this case, when I run the model, you see that using the common rule, which means start with your taxable accounts first, then go to your tax deferred accounts like your 401ks, then go to your Roth IRAs. The longevity of your portfolio is going to be around 34 and a half years, but you can actually bump that up by 4.1 years, a little over 4 years to 38 years using a modified common rule. It's a common rule that takes better advantage of what you know about your heir's tax rate. So the big picture here is you can increase longevity by 4 years or get the additional 0.45% of tax alpha over the common rule. And that's really what this calculator is all about. How can you make just slightly different decisions in your retirement in order to stretch out, in this case, the longevity of the portfolio? I provide some next steps. These pictures are really helpful. This actually shows age in retirement along this axis, and then this is your after-tax retirement income need. Under the common rule, what's in orange is you're going to go ahead and use your taxable assets along with any interest, along with any type of pension or Social Security or bond interest you might have. And then at some point, the spouse passes away, the tax brackets drop down. And so now you're filing as a single, and this is what's often called the widow penalty. So the remaining spouse ends up having to pay much higher taxes because of the fact that they're no longer filing their taxes as a married filing jointly. And you can see here's the tax brackets here, and this magenta line is really important from tax efficiency because it represents the point at which you would not want to consume from your tax deferred accounts, because at that point you're more efficient giving them to your heir. Below that, though, you are just as efficient, in fact more efficient, for the retiree to use those assets. What the modified common rule does is it says bring some of those blue withdrawals, which is your tax deferred accounts, bring those earlier. It not only prevents these RMDs from kicking in, it extends the portfolio's life. And so that's what you see here, an extension of the portfolio's life. You can then scroll down and see information about the taxes that are paid throughout the life. And as you can see, obviously, you'd rather be paying $20,000 in taxes for these years as opposed to over $30,000 in taxes over these years. Again, this is the widow penalty. And then you can see what happens with the account balances. Of course, the obvious thing here is that we've completely exhausted all of our accounts. So there's really no benefit with performing a Roth conversion. Let me see if I can't. Yeah, we'll slide this guy over a little bit. So you also can see what does the first year look like? How do you get to that $150,000? You get there by using a taxable account withdrawals. Well, you're not going to use any. You're going to really start drawing down heavily those tax deferred accounts, and you're wanting to draw that down because it's more tax efficient. And this will summarize what your first year looks like pre-tax, your taxes paid, and your after-tax. And then I say, well, you know what? You don't need to convert. You do not need to run a Roth conversion because in this case, there is no problem with your tax-deferred account. It's not an excess amount. That excess amount is not something that would trigger the benefit from a Roth conversion. So then I close off on the page by saying, please revisit this once a year because, of course, things change and information about the tax bracket. So that is if you were to run out of money. If you don't run out of funds. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yep, go ahead.
We're getting a decent number of questions in, and so I'd rather just take this, as you go through one case at a time, just because you're on it, and I think it'll be easier for people to follow. Okay, let me sort of in backwards order. Bob is asking what actions were different in the modified common rule versus the common rule. I think you touched on that here.
Yeah, so the difference between the modified common rule and the common rule is the modified common rule always will try to consume assets from the tax deferred account up to the heirs tax rate or up to the limit of that's needed for income. So in the example of what we were just looking at here, the limit of income was $150,000. I said, well, let me go ahead and fill up as much tax deferred assets early on to use up those assets earlier in a way that's tax efficient. We know it's tax efficient if it's below this magenta line.
Okay, great. Related to that, let me see here. Dan asked for essentially what's the definition of tax alpha? If you could, in your words, sum that up, that would be great.
Sure. So the tax alpha that I'm showing you here is the difference between if you use a more optimal rule versus using the common rule. And it's the amount of additional effective return you're getting on your investments by sequencing your withdrawals in a slightly different order than the common rule. So it's that additional return. I also use the term tax alpha in my presentation. In that context, it was the additional return that you were getting by making the conversion, by making the decision to convert versus not convert. So it's that additional effective annualized return that you're getting from performing the conversion, which, as you saw, in some cases were positive, and in other cases could have actually been negative.
Okay, we've had several folks ask about, let me grab one of these questions. Does the program consider the impact on IRMA premiums, right, when doing a Roth conversion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it currently does not. In fact, that's actually in the survey that I put out. That is one of the features I'm considering to include because you're right, they're not negligible. IRMA premiums do have an impact on a retiree, and so that is a feature I'm considering to include. But there are others as well. So I would encourage you. This is an anonymous survey. If that's something that's important, go ahead. You can actually, when you take the survey, you can go over here and say, put IRMA right to the top of the list. Is IRMA more important in a calculator like this than, say, a reverse mortgage? Or what about estate taxes? So I'm not including estate taxes right now. What about rental income? Maybe that should be a little bit higher. Maybe, well, if you're in a tax with states, maybe state taxes should be higher. So the short of it is no, I do not have IRMA in there right now. Right now, it's really just trying to keep itself below those income tax levels. It will have still some tax efficiency, but it's not explicitly including IRMA at this point.
Yeah, I would tell you anecdotally, just hearing that from a lot of my listeners, IRMA would be a big deal, a big deal. Okay, yeah. Let me just repeat for everybody. Jim, I think you mentioned the open source program for Social Security. I believe it's opensocialsecurity.com. There you go, opensocialsecurity.com. I posted that in the question box again for everybody as well. I believe Mike Piper's behind that. I've read a fair amount about him, and so I think this is something worth investigating. I also posted, I'm a big fan of Larry Kotnikoff's program, MaximizeMySocialSecurity.com. I posted a link to that. honestly, that program's like a couple $100. It's really comprehensive. You can literally interface with your Social Security statement. You can literally drag and drop your earnings record. It's really slick. I've never really looked at Mike's program. I've read about him and read reviews. Okay, let me just go. So Swan was asking the explanations brought up after clicking the question buttons in the calculator look especially. Okay, I'm sorry. No question. Just a compliment that looks helpful. Let me just scan real quick again. Okay, I think let me just go down to the bottom one more time before you go on. Okay. Yep. Okay, great. Other than someone just posted, I think the IRMA would be a huge feature. So I'll let you continue on.
Yeah, and I want to say, and I want to say IRMA kicks in over 200,000. I don't remember the numbers offhand. It is fairly high in terms of, I believe, the adjusted gross income. But again, don't quote me on that. So at least the cases I'm showing you, I know typically wouldn't, or there'd be some triggering of IRMA, so it might have some effect on that, but it's a good point. And it's, like I said, it's a feature that, again, if you complete the survey, I'd appreciate it. So the other one I want to show you is, the example I was showing previously had these three categories. I just walked through the modified common rule where the retiree has insufficient funds. Now I want to talk about this lower right region, which is now a good candidate for Roth conversions, because now you're going to be passing on a significant amount of assets to an heir. So what you're seeing on your screen now is exactly what you just saw in terms of the inputs. The only difference was I didn't let the individuals live as long, and I gave them a lot more money in their tax-deferred account, so their 401k. And so what you can see is in the time frame under the common rule says, well, use your taxable assets first unless you have RMDs. And so these RMDs are the yellow lines. That's saying that, well, the RMDs are kicking in here. And so now you have RMDs kicking in, and you can see it actually goes above the level where the income is even needed. So you didn't need the income back here, but suddenly you have this excess income. So this is an example where, well, if you don't do that, you can actually do a Roth conversion. And so what you can see here is normally the modified common rule would just bring up this value right up to this dark line, which is the income need. We're saying, no, you can actually go as high as this magenta area here and still keep it as tax efficient retirement income, because this is all still paying a tax that's lower than what is eventually going to go to your heir. And the consequence of that is it doesn't trigger as high of taxes here. It doesn't trigger as high of taxes here. And in fact, one of the things it does along with the modified common rule is it's leaving much less to an heir. So the heir is going to owe in their inheritance $888,823 versus under the modified common rule with Roth conversions, they only owe $13,000. So you're taking on the tax burden away from the heir because the heir's tax rate is higher. You can actually see the Roth conversion happening. There's the years the Roth conversion was happening. It was actually growing faster than it normally would. Otherwise, it would have just been growing under the common rule, just kind of gradually growing because it was never even touched during retirement. So we're saying, yeah, make it grow a little bit faster, and then at some point you can't afford to do Roth conversions anymore because this blue line, which is the line for the tax deferred assets, those 401ks, you already project at that point, if you do those 6 years worth of Roth conversions, you're going to largely use up your tax deferred accounts, which means there isn't a lot of tax inefficiency being passed on to your heir. And you can actually see the details of the Roth conversion now in this first year retirement decision. You're no longer taking any taxable assets out. You're taking very large tax deferred account withdrawals out. So in the amount of $371,000, but that's still going to be tax efficient relative to the heir. What you see in parentheses then is the amount that is going into the Roth account. So it's increasing by the amount of $177,892. That has the effect that you will pay more, or you'll see a larger pre-tax amount, but it will still get you right onto that $150,000 as your desired after-tax income. And then I also go through a fairly detailed discussion of what that conversion analysis looks like, which is you have an heir who's got a marginal tax rate, I assume, at 25%. And what you find is that in the first year retirement, you'll have a Roth conversion of $232,514. That is what we saw in this top chart. That's this blue section of the bar above the dark line, above your income need. That's the amount of the Roth conversion. And it takes you all the way up to the 24% bracket, right? Because it's anything at 24% and below is tax efficient because your heir's tax rate was 25%. So this is the bracket you'd want to stay with under, because that's where it's going to be more tax efficient for you to pay the taxes than it is for your heir to pay the taxes. It tells you how much it increases your Roth account balance by in the first year, how much in additional income taxes you'll pay. And then I provide a real clear note. This income tax is $3,506 less than if these funds were passed to your heir, who would owe income tax at a rate of 25%. Because remember, that's the game when it comes to Roth conversion. Paying less income tax now than later, which means you're at a lower tax rate now than you're later. And since we know the heir's tax rate is 25%, we want to take full advantage of all those tax brackets up to, but not including, the 25%. In this case, just this conversion gives you this additional $3,500 being passed to the heir. And then I provide a little bit of a discussion here about what happens. You do 6 years of Roth conversions. That will ensure that you don't exhaust the tax deferred account, but you certainly shrink it down such that your heir doesn't take on such a large penalty when they inherit it. So that's how the Roth conversion analysis is now embedded into this calculator. And this is really, I think, an important new feature, because while Roth conversions might seem to be very appealing in some respects, it really does depend upon other decisions that are being made. You can try to do a Roth conversion analysis just using the common rule, but that then bypasses this idea that you could use a different rule that doesn't require a conversion, that in fact could allow you to still reduce the size of that tax deferred account, those 401ks that you don't necessarily want to pass on to your heirs. You can do Roth conversion, or you can just draw down those assets earlier. And what you're seeing here is really doing both of those things. So I think that's about all I wanted to cover. I will add, or maybe I'll just make this bigger. I was encouraged by Tom that, for those of you that are participating, I did put on a promotion code for the software. You can actually run the savings calculator completely free. You can run the regular calculator free, but it doesn't show you the optimal result. It'll tell you the tax alpha, but it won't tell you actually what the first year retirement decision looks like. If you want to subscribe to it, I am taking 25% off. If you enter the promotion code FEN2023, that'll knock 25% off, and I do it as an annual subscription. I do have a couple other additional resources. Of course, a link to the calculator. There was a Think Advisor article written about the calculator back in, I think it was November of last year. This paper actually won Best Paper Award at the Academic Research Colloquium sponsored by the CFP Board. You're welcome to email me. This is the email address I use for this business. And then just thank you for your time. I want to thank all of you for participating today. I'll put in one last plug for my Qualtrics survey. Help me rank where new features should be included in this calculator for the future. So I think that's all I have, Tom. Let me see if I can open it up to any more questions from the audience.
Great. All right. Thanks, Jim. And yeah, we definitely have a fair amount of questions. And I never thought I could have put a polling question. I'm sorry. I just thought about that. For those that are interested in learning more about the software, you can certainly email Jim straight away and or go to the site and subscribe. You're welcome to do that. I've spent some time with the calculator. It's been a few months, but it definitely does a really nice job. Okay, let me come back on screen as well. As I'm doing that, I'm doing a time check. For those of you that were on at the beginning, again, if you're a subscriber or the guest of a subscriber and you're worried about whether you qualified for CE, you should have been on the required amount of time, which is 50 minutes. So you're welcome to, if we're going to continue on with questions, as always, I think many of you find this really valuable. So this is bonus time, as I call it. And I encourage you to stay in and listen to the Q&A part. All right. Let me see. First from Kevin was asking, how do you justify Roth conversions for clients who are currently in the higher marginal tax brackets? I think you've sort of touched on that, Jim, but if you could, please.
Yeah, so to me, the calculus really comes down to what the tax rates are going to be in the future. So if they are in a high tax bracket now and they do a conversion, you're locked in paying a high amount of taxes. And so if taxes go even higher in the future, then you can make that argument. Or if you know you're going to pass it to an heir, I like to give the example of if I'm in, say, the 25% tax bracket, but I plan to give it to my kids, and my kids are, maybe they're going to become a neurosurgeon or something that with a high income. Well, they may be in the 30% tax bracket. Well, so even though it seems like I'm in a high tax bracket today, that could be used to justify the conversion. So I think that's an example of one, but it is something that you should be very cautious about. You can't kind of undo a Roth conversion, and I don't think it really generates as much tax alpha or as much benefit as maybe some of the perceptions might be out there. And the challenge is we just don't know where Congress will go with tax rates in the future. It's always a hard thing to juggle. But we do know, and I'll use the example, if you're in a high tax bracket now and you plan to give a significant portion of your wealth to a charitable organization, many charitable organizations will pay nothing on your tax deferred assets. They will get them tax free. So under that case, you should absolutely not convert those assets to a Roth, because you're literally taking and shrinking those accounts that otherwise would not have even needed to shrink down, because those charitable organizations get them tax-free. So that's a clear case when you absolutely would not want to.
Okay, great. Skip asked, and just as a reminder for everybody, I know a lot of you had asked a question as well around it. Will there be a replay? All sessions are recorded, available as a replay under past webinars. If you go to financialexpertsnetwork.com, financialexpertsnetwork.com, on the main menu bar, there's financial advisors. There's a drop-down menu that includes past webinars. That's where you will find today's session, all sessions, right? And you have the ability to sort by or search based on the name of the session, the speaker, like Jim, or any other past speaker. You can search by category, type of webinar, etc. So as always, please bookmark that, and you can see the sessions. We have about 30 sessions that are available as replays for CE credit for, again, those of you who are subscribers. So, all right, next to Alan is asking about, do you have a calculator that determines the optimal amounts of the Roth conversions for different years? So does your calculator give you that answer, Jim?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a great question. Yes, it does. That was sort of the whole point of integrating the calculator. So it's still seeking an optimal solution. And so, yeah, it is giving you that optimal result, which is it's guaranteeing that it will never trigger income taxes that are higher than that of your heir. So it does that. It already uses your tax deferred accounts in a way that's already very tax efficient, which is why it's able to avoid, in some cases, having to do Roth conversions when they could have been accomplished another way.
Okay. And does it identify the year that's best for the conversion? It does. So okay.
Yeah. So
okay, great.
Yeah, and in fact, it also follows this idea that, right, the earlier you do it, that you get the benefit. So maybe if I can share my screen one more time. Let's see if I can share. Are you able to see my screen again? Yeah. So here's an example of the Roth conversion. So you can actually see the Roth conversion happening. Actually, in this tab here, you can actually see the Roth conversion happening. So here is year 1 through year 20. You can see normally you ended up with these RMDs under the common rule. The Roth conversion is actually happening right in here. It's drawdowns from the tax-deferred account that show up above the level of income that's necessary. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you've got 6 years of Roth conversions that the calculator is considering. And from those 6 years, it's able to significantly bring down that $3 million account to something like $1.5 million, which is then over the time frame going to really basically bring it to zero, bring it pretty close to zero. And so and then I even summarize what it looks like in the first year, and then it even says here, after your first year, additional Roth conversions will occur through year 6 and will not exhaust your final tax deferred account. So yeah, you can definitely see evidence of the Roth conversion, both in the language I provide here, as well as what you see in the image here. And then you can also see it in terms of the account balances, which is the Roth account balances here are growing, and then it levels off because you're no longer converting. And here, because it's growing because you're drawing down the tax deferred account like that. So you can see evidence of it throughout the calculator. Yeah, the Roth conversion is doing it in a way that's really trying to shrink down that tax deferred account, because we don't want to pass it to the heir. The heir's tax brackets are too high. We want to get that as close to zero as possible.
And again, just to reiterate, that calculation is not considering in the higher Medicare premiums, the IRMA impact, or potential increase in taxes on Social Security benefits and the combined income. So, okay, next to Kathleen. For Social Security taxes, what it's doing is, I am assuming that 85% of Social Security is taxed as ordinary income, and 15% is not. So it is correctly capturing all of the way Social Security is taxed for higher income earners. But you're right, it's not capturing. I'm not currently including the additional penalty associated with IRMA. Okay, great. Jim, I'm sure you mentioned, what's the cost of the calculator before the discount?
So the cost before is $199, and then I'm taking 25% off, so it's like $149.
Okay, great. All right, let's go next to Kathleen is asking, does the point on tax rates needing to be lower at the point of conversion, at the time of conversion, then in the future take into account the tax-free growth of the assets over time before they're withdrawn?
Yes, it does. And in fact, I show mathematically that, in fact, it's independent of the growth rate. It doesn't matter what the growth rate is. All that it matters about, and that was what I showed you on that previous slide, all that matters, if you're funding it from inside of the IRA, which means you're doing it after age 60, all that matters is what the current tax rate is compared to the future tax rate. And as long as the current tax rate that you're paying on the conversion is less than what's in the future, it will have a positive payoff.
Jim, could you go back to that slide? What would it be? Slide 18.
Yeah.
And this ties to Bob's question. We lost there you are. You're back on camera. Okay, great. Okay. There we go. Great. So Bob, and you probably picked up on this, but Bob was asking, are you only looking at trying to maximize tax efficient distribution in retirement, or would your research or results change if the goal is to maximize legacy wealth transfer results? And I think your visual here does a great job of that, right? The lower right part of that is where clients have excess funds. And really, the big benefit here in doing the Roth conversion is on a tax efficient basis, you can increase the wealth transfer to the heirs. I think that's the punchline here, right, Jim?
Yeah. So in fact, maybe I could have highlighted that better. So the way the program works is it's trying to do either maximize longevity of the portfolio, which applies to this group. This is the group that runs out of money. So how can you take however long your portfolio lasts and increase it? So I showed you an example where you increased it by 4 years. The alternative is these two groups, they actually don't run out of money. They have leftover, they have sufficient, or in this case, excessive income. So then it's truly a maximization of after-tax wealth for the heir. And so that's where you need to know what the heir's tax rate is in order to run that maximization. So this is, in academic, this is what's called nonlinear programming. That's what actually happens when you run this, called the SLSQP, but it is running a maximization of after-tax wealth for your heir.
Okay, great. Again, I'm just scanning through. We still have a few questions here, a bunch of questions. Let me go back up here. Okay, in terms of the returns that were used, it was the S&P. The time frame was 1871 through 2022. That the source was Irrational Exuberance from Robert Shiller, correct, Jim?
Yes, this was the input. Yeah, this was the chart, I believe.
Yep. Actually, and it's funny, folks, if you just Google that, Irrational Exuberance, Robert Shiller, you'll find he actually gives you some downloadable Excel files where you can capture that if you're interested, if you're semi-geekly, like some of us happen to be. I'm not in Jim's geeky category, but aspire to that someday. So again, yeah, that's the rolling returns, or that's the time frame. It is the S&P. It is inclusive of dividends. It's a total return, I believe. I did a quick search as you were chatting. Okay, mm-hmm. Great. And by the way, I've had Ed Macquarie on in the past as well, and he is really does a lot of great research on the history of market returns. And again, if you go to our website under financialexpertsnetwork.com, everybody's favorite website, I think, right above Google, even above your market return sites, right, sort of slightly kind of tied with ETF Math Guy. We'll put it there. All right, make sure you're again bookmarking these sites, and definitely subscribe to Jim's commentary. That's actually how I found Jim in the first place. I'm not sure how I stumbled into that, but okay, great. So we talked about market returns. We answered that. Let me see, Maria, I know you had a question. Let me get to that in a second. I lost my place where, Maria, let me see if I can find your question again. I know it was something with heirs. Again, I think
actually, so as you're looking it up, maybe I'll show you all a resource. So on the ETF Math Guy website, under the calculator, I provide a lot of additional detail if you don't want to read the technical articles that are listed at the top of the calculator. So at the top of the calculator, you can always look and actually read the either published or working paper articles. If you don't want to go through that, you just want to read a shorter version, calculating the heir's inheritance, that's the equation. So the wealth is the tax rate of the heir affecting how the IRA or that tax deferred account is. This value of alpha is actually associated with the stretch provision of the inherited IRA or tax deferred account. Here's the Roth account, and then here's the brokerage account, which receives the full step up in cost basis.
Interesting. Okay, great. All right, Maria was asking, she needs a repeat of what happens if bequeathing a taxable account to an heir, which gives the heir a step up. What is best for the donor?
Yeah, so this is the trade-off that has to be done, right? So you can, if you bought Google shares in 2004, and you spent $10,000 on them, and now they're worth $3 million. When they're passed on to the heir, my understanding is that the heir can then receive those shares, and if they wish, they could sell those shares immediately and not have to pay any capital gains tax. So that's the step up in cost basis that heirs receive when they receive when they receive that. Now, I do know there is if the heir is, that's for heirs that are a non-spouse heir. I do know that if you're in a community property state, I believe that also applies to spouse heirs. And in fact, the calculator includes that, which is why I asked actually within the profile of the calculator, which I didn't show, but you can set up, hey, where do you live? What state do you reside in? It doesn't calculate the property tax, but it does determine what the appropriate step up in cost basis would be for your surviving spouse. And that is kind of important because that'll change what the cost basis is, and in fact changes the calculus on, well, maybe you're better off now starting to use some of those taxable account assets because the surviving spouse no longer has that larger tax liability because they've received a step up.
We had the question from Gene. Gene was asking, the session one of the sessions that you did, I think last March of 2022 was focused on, really trying to figure out what's the best drawdown strategy, right? What's the optimal withdrawal strategy? And that was different from today's session in that, today's really focused on the conversion. It really wasn't, again, the previous session wasn't focused on conversions. It was, okay, we got tax deferred, taxable, et cetera. What does that look like? So it did not contemplate the conversion part. So Gene, just to make that clear, definitely worth going back and listening to. And again, Jim used the calculator in part of that, if I recall. I know we looked at that a little bit. So I encourage you to feel free to check that out. All right, let me keep going here.
Yeah, in fact, Tom, you bring up a good point because I would suggest for those of you that really want to get a more in-depth review of the calculator, you would see that in probably a better format in the detailed presentation I made for Tom in the Financial Experts Network. I think it was March of last year, where we spent much more time on the actual inner workings of the calculator. So for those that can get access to that, I would encourage you to take a look at that.
Let me see if I can grab the screen here. I'll just show everybody how to find that. Give me 1 second. So again, if you go to financialexpertsnetwork.com, right, and I'm going to click on Financial Advisor. So financialexpertsnetwork.com, Financial Advisors. And by the way, we're going to change our interface here. We're working on that again for the third time. Hopefully we'll get it right the third time or get it better. Jim, if I just put in Jim D, I'm going to just put in Jim D and see what happens. Again, when I search under past webinars, you'll see a bunch. So it's picking up on.
Oh, it might be under James.
No, I think
it might be under James.
Jim. Okay. Sure. Boy, I got this when I did it before I took the screen over. Okay, well, there you are. Okay, there's short-term and asset correlations, long-term trends. I thought that was interesting. And then again, if you scroll down, sorry, this is so long here. Let me do this. I'll be more refined. So if you go again and just put Jim's, let's go in. Sorry, folks. I'll just put in Jim DIL. Hoping that would refine. Okay, so I'm just curious. That refines it a little more, but it's not showing that one. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So March 1st, right? And then I just click Learn More, and then it brings me here. And then this is where you can get the replay. The materials should be there. I'm not sure why it's not letting me scroll down, but the materials you'll find below here. And again, I recommend that session for sure. So hopefully, folks, you find your way to that. Okay, let's continue on to kind of get through. Okay, Bob was asking, in the second case study, did the Roth conversion taxes get paid from the IRA tax-deferred account or from the taxable account?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the way the model was built is I always assumed that current year dividends and interest were always used to meet income needs. And from what I saw from my analysis, it didn't take much for that value of the cost basis to be have much unrealized capital gains for it to be no longer optimal. So I actually instructed the program to say, you know what, unless you have nearly no capital gains, which typically you don't have yet, at least some, to just pull it from the tax deferred, have the tax deferred account basically help offset, draw it out a little bit more, so when that goes into the Roth can then pay for taxes. So yeah, that long discussion I went into about how the markets behave, that ended up not needing to go into the calculator because I already knew from that analysis, based upon the assumptions the model was already making about how you satisfy current income needs, you're better off just going ahead and paying for it from the converted assets.
Okay, and just to make it clear, the charge for the calculator and everybody listening would be $149 for the year. It's not $149 a month.
No,
so
it's per year.
Yeah. Okay, great. Annette is saying she subscribed, but it doesn't seem to know because I registered after subscribing. But okay, Annette, I'll deal with that after. We'll get you squared away. Barbara had a great question, which is how does the calculator work if you have a single person, a single client, as opposed to a couple with these calculations?
Yeah, so actually the calculations are much simpler because you are only dealing with a single tax bracket that doesn't change over time. So it's always assuming your taxes are filed as a single. And so assuming the standard deduction and the tax brackets for a single, you don't see that step down when the surviving spouse files their taxes later. You can either set it up in the profile once you register an account, or you can just go in and say, I don't have a spouse, and then just ignore any spousal inputs. And maybe to touch on your point that came up, Tom, if you do decide you want to purchase the software for an annual subscription, please, when you register on the site to create that profile, use the same email address, because that's how the two will link to each other and ensure that you'll have then full access to it.
Okay. Yeah.
And maybe one last thing to add. If you do complete the survey and you want a demonstration, I'm more than happy to meet with individuals or small groups online, and I can answer any individual questions you might have.
Good question here from Chris. Does the calculator take into account inflation, for things such as income, etc.? It does.
Yeah, so there is an inflation.
That, if I recall.
Yeah. You can definitely change it. Now, you might say, well, I don't see inflation because everything looks flat. I'm keeping everything in real year dollars. So all the returns are real returns, not nominal returns, which means technically the tax brackets usually go up at the rate of inflation. That's why the tax brackets are all flat year over year. But inflation's in there. And if you increase the inflation, you will definitely see an effect of that.
Okay, great. So a little bit of a long question or seeking to confirm something. Michael's asking, ignoring for now all extraordinary income and tax considerations for the IRA owner and or his heirs, you seem to be saying that if someone runs out of liquid taxable assets with which to pay taxes for future Roth conversions, you are fine with using some of the tax-deferred traditional IRA assets to pay the taxes incurred as a result of the Roth IRA conversions. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, with the exception that I'm assuming that if you do that, you're at least age 59 and a half, so that you're not getting that early withdrawal from the Roth IRA to pay the tax liability. So I am assuming you're basically 60 years old when you do that.
Okay, let me see. For Gene and anybody else, again, you're welcome to email Jim to set up a time to chat. I leave it to Jim to manage his calendar, but if you just email etfmathguy@gmail.com, Gene, I'd recommend you do that. Okay. Dan is asking, how does using a qualified charitable distribution affect the decision whether to convert to a Roth in the same year? So, to the best of my knowledge, a qualified charitable distribution is one where you take out $1 from your tax-deferred account, and it doesn't trigger any taxes. That's my understanding of it. That is the most tax-efficient way you could use the assets from your tax-deferred accounts, right? You've never paid taxes on it in most cases, and the charitable organization doesn't receive taxes. If you're going down that line of that's how you want to disperse your tax-deferred assets, you should not be doing any Roth conversion, because your heir, in this case the charitable organization, has a tax rate of 0. So there's really no situation where you'd want to be converting. Okay. Jim, I think you got through all the questions. Really appreciate you staying overtime here, if you will, to do that. Really appreciate you coming back. Again, always love having you. So I leave it to you when you're interested in coming back, whatever topic related to this, not related, please let me know, and definitely love to have you back. Love to have you back with Ed and your other researcher partner whose name escapes me. That would be Philip, I guess. And if you guys,
Philip. Yep.
Yeah, if you'd ever want to come back, the three of you, and talk, I think that would be fascinating. So, and again, happy as you make progress with the calculator, we're certainly happy to give you feedback. And again, if you want to even have kind of a hands-on session as you're kind of contemplating some of the future changes, feel free. I think that would be a fascinating session as well. So, so with that, again, Jim, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And again, I appreciate all the input I've gotten from your participants. Like I said, that's what motivated me to include the Roth conversions into the model. If I can get more survey results, and things like IRMA are clearly a big swinger, I'd love to know it, because that's where I want to invest in additional enhancements on a tool like this that will hopefully benefit many.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, my 2 cents, would be the reverse mortgage part, because again, it's outside money, it's tax-free cash. The trade-off is you just have to manage, or be mindful of, what happens to the available home equity if the clients were to move, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, frankly, you could model that. But that's a really attractive, again, source of funds, tax-free, outside of the investment assets, if you will.
Yeah, and it's like I see them over your left shoulder. Wade Pfau's book on retirement income guidebook, I believe it's called, does a really nice job of a very unbiased view of that, as well as many topics. So, in fact, quite frankly, that's actually where I was reminded. I had seen it once before, but that open Social Security calculator that's free, he actually mentions it in his book. So I would say, for those of you that haven't read that book, it's definitely one that I can only endorse if you're willing to get into some of the really important details.
2 things. If you go to Knowledge Center on our website, under Knowledge Center, and again, we're going to reorganize this, but we have a nice summary, a white paper of Wade's research. Again, if you click on that, it's in a what's called a flipping book format, and really a nice, again, and you can download this, access it however you want. You can view it online. Really does a nice job of summarizing Wade's research on this. I definitely recommend, if you really want an objective view of reverse mortgages, how they work, when you should be thinking about them, etc. So I'm going to throw one more question. And by the way, I also have to share this book, Rest Easy Retirement. Scott Stoltz, who has been in the annuity industry for, I think, at least 35 years. Really bright guy. Used to run the insurance business for Raymond James, work at Jackson National. He's now done a second book for consumers. It's really well done. Again, Rest Easy Retirement, Scott Stoltz. If you're at all open-minded about annuities and you just really, frankly, want to learn about it, this version is written for consumers. It's really accessible, and I really recommend it. I never was I wasn't open-minded until annuities, until I got beaten over the head. And years ago, I heard Harold Levensky tell me, I think they have a time and place, and that's what sort of led me to research them. But if I may throw one more question at you, Jim, Bob's asking if, again, primary goal is wealth transfer. Would you conclude that Roth conversion taxes are best paid by tax-deferred accounts, so taxable accounts can be preserved for future step-up in basis?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and there's just so much that can go into it. So I would say yes, provided your taxable account is already pretty tax efficient. So if it's in, the S&P 500 ETF, or even preferably, an ETF that doesn't even throw off dividends, that is just going to be purely having a return based upon a capital gain, then I would say, yeah. that it's probably better to take advantage of that step up in cost basis. However, if you're in an actively managed mutual fund or a hedge fund or something that's throwing off huge amounts of tax liabilities along the way and creating a lot of tax drag, I would say, you know what, either switch that investment into one that's already more tax efficient, or consider liquidating that one instead, to avoid that tax drag. But it's the calculation of that other taxable investment. It can be in so many different areas that will influence what sort of the best decision might be there. And of course, I'm a little bit biased based upon my website's name. I'm a little bit biased towards ETFs. They are inherently tax efficient in almost all cases. So, but obviously not all investments are necessarily that tax efficient.
Okay, and then just I'm typing in the name of the book is Rest Easy Retirement, Rest-Easy Retirement from Scott Stolz, Stolz. You can go to Amazon and buy it. And again, hopefully everybody sees that on screen. I bought 3 copies, one to support Scott. And again, he's coming back, I think, in July. He's been on for 4 or 5 webinars. He's a phenomenal expert on annuity. So again, hopefully that helps, Gene. But if anybody needs help finding that, feel free to email me after. And with that, I'm going to bring it to a close. Again, Jim, thanks. Look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. I appreciate it. And certainly feel free to reach out to me. And again, one last plug. If you'd like to complete the survey, very much appreciate your feedback. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, everybody, thanks for staying on so long. As always, I hope you're checking out upcoming webinars. Don't forget that. Tomorrow we have an interesting session. Really, I tell you, 2 probably the brightest minds I've seen in the mortgage industry, John Thompson and Todd Ballinger. Really, really bright gentlemen, really going to walk you through 11 factors to consider with a big, long mortgage. I'm going through that personal decision right now, so I'm very interested. Then tomorrow, again, as always, we have 3 webinars a week, I think, right now. Kate Gillen, who specializes in helping firms and advisors optimizing their operations and workflows, is going to show you how you can use your CRM. And really, it doesn't matter, whatever CRM is, the same principles and logic apply. So I recommend that session. And again, check out all the upcoming sessions that we have. We have a lot of folks some you don't, but they're really very much experts in their area. So again, upcoming webinars under financialexpertsnetwork.com. You can click on this as an option, find it there. Of course, if you log in, it's a lot easier. You can see all of these and you can instantly register using, again, we already know once you're logged in, your name, your email, you don't have to really enter anything and just click a box. So hopefully everybody's familiar with that. That's as easy as you can get. Again, if you log in, my dashboard's going to be a little different because I'm an administrator. You click on upcoming webinars, and all you have to do there is just click on boxes to register, whatever ones are of interest. And again, as a reminder, you can always click on the join webinar. If you've already registered, all you have to do is click on join webinar a few minutes, at least come in 5-10 minutes before, and that will take you right to the session. So again, thanks for joining. Thanks for staying on so long. Hope to see you tomorrow and have a great rest of the night.